Chaos is erupting in New York City with Palestinian protests, and where is Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg? Busy prosecuting former President Donald Trump on, excuse the pun, trumped-up charges in his Manhattan hush money trial. More than 100 protesters were hauled away by NYPD cops as they chanted in support of Palestinians near Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's home in Brooklyn. Columbia University gave a 2 p.m. ultimatum to vacate their mini tent city on the campus, but still failed to begin trying to rein in the disruptive anti-Israel protesters that were camping out on their grounds. Officials at the prestigious Ivy League school in Manhattan finally claimed much later that they had begun handing out suspensions to students who didn't heed the order to vacate. Columbia University Vice President of Public Affairs Ben Chang said that suspended students will be ineligible to finish out the semester or even graduate. He also described the encampment as creating an unwelcoming environment for many of their Jewish students and a noisy distraction that interferes with teaching and learning. In the midst of all of this chaos in the Big Apple, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, instead of fighting crime, he launches a Trump show trial. As United States Representative Lee Zeldin put it, instead of leading the courage to defend New Yorkers by enacting the necessary charges to make life safer, freer, and more affordable, our elected officials have set their sights elsewhere, trying to imprison and bankrupt President Biden's chief political opponent, Donald Trump. Now, all eyes are on 100 Center Street, where Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has launched his show trial in the world's media capital. According to legal experts, never before has a charge like this been brought without evidence of an underlying crime. As Zeldin said, this unprecedented abuse of power and prosecutorial overreach is nothing less than a threat to democracy. And it's not just him saying this. In a New York Times guest essay, Boston University law professor Jed Hanselman Sugarman argued Bragg was overreaching in his attempts to try a federal election crime under New York state law. He said that the Manhattan DA's allegation against Donald Trump was vague since the prosecution failed to specify an election crime or a valid theory of fraud. It's definitely time for us to take a look at these trumped-up charges and the overall chaotic landscape unfolding in New York right now. Are you guys ready for this? Okay, let's go ahead and dive right in. So first, a boots on the ground look at the situation in pro-Palestinian protests at colleges across New York City. Check it out.
Encampments continue sprawled at Columbia University as students call for the school to divest funds away from companies they say profit from the Israel-Hamas war.
They're super tenacious. They're really cool. They're all are really fighting for something.
A similar scene also playing out at FIT and CCNY. Yesterday, White House officials were asked about campus protests across the country and whether police should be used to break them up.
People should have the ability to air their views and to share their perspectives publicly, but it has to be peaceful. We'll leave it to local authorities to determine how these protests are managed.
Meanwhile, over in the Middle East, the International Criminal Court could be issuing arrest warrants to both Israeli and Hamas leaders, according to the New York Times. Prime Minister Netanyahu and other top officials could reportedly face charges.
Now, with things like this happening right now, Donald Trump supporters, they're having trouble understanding why anyone would vote for Biden with all the damage that he's done to our country. Just looking at the stats, more than 100 protesters were hauled away by NYPD cops as they chanted in support of Palestinians near Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's home in Brooklyn. Now, according to this, the anti-Israel protesters, including many from Jewish activist organizations, were arrested after they refused to budge from blocking traffic at Grand Army Plaza during the protest, where they were calling "Cedar in the streets." Now, I looked at some of the footage. Protesters were either standing or sitting in the streets with their arms linked together. They were chanting things like "Ceasefire now" and "Let Gaza live." Now, according to a tweet from organizers, thousands of U.S. Jews with Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and Jews for Racial and Economic Justice are holding an emergency pass over Cedar, shutting down the streets of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's home to demand he stop sending weapons to the Israel government as it carries out a genocide. Protesters also projected pro-Palestinian messages on the Brooklyn Public Library, including "Stop funding genocide" and "No one is free until everyone is free." Congress just recently passed a $95.3 billion aid package on Tuesday for Ukraine and Israel, as well as in defense of Taiwan. About $17 billion will be going toward Israel, which has been in a war against the terrorist group Hamas with Palestine ever since the terror group's deadly sneak attack on the Jewish state on October 7th. Now, with Chuck Schumer saying that this is one of the most consequential measures Congress has passed in years to protect America's security and the future of democracy, we got to look at what this foreign aid package is really doing for our country. Now, if you're just now tuning in, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated on all of our content. We're deep diving into the current events rocking New York City and the controversy surrounding Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's priorities. Now, if you're finding our exploration into these pressing issues insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I really value your support and your engagement here on YouTube. Really appreciate you guys. Appreciate you so much. All right. Now, one of the hotspots for these New York City protests is Columbia University. They began handing out suspensions. School Vice President of Public Affairs Ben Chang said suspended students will be ineligible to finish out the semester or graduate. He also added that the Columbia University protest encampment is creating an unwelcoming environment for many of their Jewish students and a noisy distraction that interferes with teaching and learning. Cops are not allowed on campus without authorization from the university, but police sources confirmed that busloads of NY police officers are standing by if summoned by the university. But administrators had not asked the cops to move in to remove the students from their $90,000 per year campus as it did April 18th, during which 108 demonstrators were dragged away in cuffs. Then we have Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg in the middle of all of this New York chaos, but still busy prosecuting Donald Trump in what many people are calling the hush money show trial. Former United States Representative Lee Zeldin wrote a piece about it and the general state of New York recently. It seems like a lot of people across the board are feeling that New York City just isn't the same anymore. Many people believe it's become a very clear example of how extreme left-wing policies can drive people away. Just look at Times Square, where recently 2 NYPD officers were attacked by a group of criminal aliens who were released from jail with no bail. On the subways, which feel more like a scene from a crime drama, with commuters anxious about getting randomly pushed onto oncoming trains. It's also hard to ignore the recent increase in assaults, like countless women sucker punched lately in broad daylight. Meanwhile, too many kids are poorly performing in public schools, trapped in cycles of poverty that seem to go on for generations. Local businesses are closing up shop, homeowners can't protect their properties, and the cost of living just keeps climbing. All the while, life in the city just seems to keep getting tougher and tougher each and every single day. It's as if the city is rotting, affected by policies that seem to favor criminals over hardworking citizens and businesses. Now, with all of this being said, Donald Trump supporters are saying that it's just shameful that any self-proclaimed Republican would not support the former president. According to Zeldin, instead of tackling these real issues head on, it feels like our leaders are distracted, focusing on trying to imprison and bankrupt President Biden's chief political opponent, Donald Trump. This trial, happening at the heart of the media world, is called a spectacle, a strategic move more about politics than justice. As Zeldin said, this unprecedented abuse of power and prosecutorial overreach is nothing less than a threat to democracy. Even the judge in this case, Juan Merchan, he's under scrutiny for potential bias given his political donations and his daughter's political activities. Zeldin described him as a left-wing Biden-Harris 2020 campaign donor. Merchan refuses to recuse himself despite overwhelming evidence of bias toward the former president. Now, if you couple that with the fact that his daughter is a prominent Democratic operative actively using this case to fundraise for Adam Schiff, her past clients include Biden-Harris and Chuck Schumer. After Trump criticized him for this, Merchan slapped him with a gag order, which many see as stripping the former president of his First Amendment right to defend himself against false charges. And as for the trial's location in the ultra-liberal Manhattan, finding an unbiased jury seems like a long shot. This situation isn't just about Trump. Experts say it reflects a broader strategy by some to limit his political future, a coordinated effort by a plethora of partisans across the country to bankrupt, imprison, and destroy him, including attempts to keep him off the ballots in some states. Now, amidst all of this, Democrats are trying to convince voters that things like rising crime is just a perception, and that the economy has never been stronger, and that the border is secure, despite what many people are clearly seeing and experiencing. I think that's what they call gaslighting, right? In contrast, Trump is actively campaigning, talking directly to Americans about their concerns and aiming to shake up the political landscape. Now, this could be a pivotal moment for Donald Trump, drawing support even from those who've traditionally voted Democrat but are now questioning their loyalty. This year could mark the formation of a broad coalition, ready to challenge the status quo and push back against desperate political maneuvers by the left. As Zeldin said in his think piece, the left can and will hurl every last desperate attack that it can conjure up at Donald Trump, but the American public can see right through it and save our country. And as my uncle said, Alvin Bragg made up those charges. He will suffer the boomerang effect and will probably be charged soon. Legal experts have weighed in on the hush money trial in New York. Jed Handelsman Sugarman, a law professor at Boston University, made the case that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg might be stretching it just a little bit by trying to prosecute a federal election crime under New York state law. He called the allegations against Donald Trump vague, pointing out the fact that the prosecution failed to specify an election crime or a valid theory of fraud. Sugarman even criticized Alvin Bragg's approach as weak, commenting that realistically, it's perfectly legal for a candidate to pay for a non-disclosure agreement. He also highlighted three major issues with Alvin Bragg's attempt to bring a federal crime to a state court. First, he pointed out that no previous case of any state prosecutor relying on Federal Election Campaign Act, which he called an overreach. Second, he mentioned that the prosecutors didn't cite judicial precedents involving the criminal statute at hand. And lastly, he explained that New York precedent does not support an interpretation of defrauding the general public. Sugarman raised concerns that the case might be more about Manhattan politics than about the law itself, describing the situation as a prosecutorial ethics embarrassment and a case of apparent selective prosecution. Did you guys hear that? Prosecutorial ethics embarrassment and a case of apparent selective prosecution. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Is what Alvin Bragg doing a matter of political persecution and basically election interference? Drop your comments down below. I want to thank y'all for hanging out with me today. Thanks so much for hitting the like button. Thank you for sharing these videos on social media, and I'll see you guys on the next one.